and welcome to another episode of Talk'n TRM. My name is Travel Risk Bex, and I'm the host of a podcast series dedicated to travel risk management. Today, I have another international guest joining us, which is always really exciting, based in Washington. I would like to call a friend. Again, this is kind of like a LinkedIn friendship that we've established over the last couple of years, Jake. So I won't say I know you personally from that side of things, but I think we've established quite a nice rapport over the work that we've done. So we met when I put a call out when we were looking at some of the standard work. As far as looking at travel service providers and how we were going to develop some of that stuff. And Jake got in touch and said he was really interested in the standard and that whole work. And then we had a whole conversation around what he does. And ever since then, when this kind of concept of doing a podcast came to me, like Jake's been one of the top people on my list to have a conversation with, because I just know there's another whole side to this stuff that you guys don't know enough about. And hopefully Jake can, share some of that with us. So I'm going to stop talking now because it is my podcast, but it's all about you. I'm absolutely delighted that you're here. Thank you so much. It's 5 a.m. What's the time over there now? Sorry.
It's now just past 6 a.m. Yeah. So
it's
from the Pacific Northwest. Yeah, it's good to be with you. I actually, for the occasion, I wore my shirt with the little Bigfoots on it here.
I love that. Thank you. For anyone watching and anyone not, just get on YouTube now and have a quick look because it's a great shirt. So, Jake, I'm going to hand over and I'm going to ask our first question. So who are you and what is it that you do?
Yeah, my name is Jake Newton. Living now in Spokane, Washington, very close to the Idaho border for those not familiar with the area up here in the Pacific Northwest. But I started my career back in 2009 in the United States Air Force. And that brought me from New York State, where I was born. It's a very small town called Lowville, New York. And Air Force basic training is down in Texas. So went there, and that was my first entree into adulthood, if you will. And I had the opportunity to try out for a career field known as SERE. Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. And then I became a SERE specialist. It's a pipeline. You have to make it. It's an attrition program. And I was one of the ones either dumb enough or just able to withstand long enough to be able to make it through and join the career field. But effectively, what I had the opportunity to do when I was in the Air Force was, for all intents and purposes, travel risk management for those in the United States military. And I'm happy to dive into that more, but did that for several years. I was medically discharged actually in 2014. The rigors of the job took its toll on my body. And that was kind of my entree into the private sector. And I joined a company called the Center for Personal Protection and Safety and have pretty well been there since, doing a couple different roles. I actually, when I originally joined, being an instructor by trade in the Air Force, my boss coming into the company wanted to use that expertise and be able to teach courses, because that's a lot of what they do. It's a training and consulting company. And so I did that, but he also wanted me to have a business development role as well, build relationships and do some of your traditional sales things. So I did that for several years. And then I went to a company called On Call International, where I actually did just straight sales for them for the West Coast for about 1.5 years, and decided that wasn't the most desirable thing I wanted to do with my career. I was pretty good at business development on that side of it when I was with CPPS originally. And I was in DC at the time and wanted to get back out to the West Coast. And this company, I had a relationship with them, and I was like, well, I'll give it a try. And so I took over their West Coast sales director position as a way to get back to the West Coast. And that was my first time going into a travel assistance company. They're much like your, Global Guardians and International SOS type company, for those not familiar with On Call. And so I did that for, I think it was about 18 months. And CPPS had an operations role open back up, and really wanted to start getting back into those things more in line with my roots of what I did in the Air Force, and really work with clients to build their programs. And so it worked out. I was able to do that and join the company again here back in Spokane, Washington. And I've been doing that since. And that was actually right, if you could believe it, right in the middle of the pandemic when that transition happened. So I've been doing that since the middle of 2020.
I remember us talking about it at the time because it was around the time we kind of started having our conversations, and it felt like a weird kind of role for you to be getting into, didn't it, when there weren't people traveling? But we also talked about the fact it's the best time to do it because you can actually get some plans in, and actually it's quieter and it's a lot easier to kind of get some of that stuff done. So we're definitely going to go back to the I've got some questions, I think, that I just want to obviously with your background, and I really do want to kind of understand a bit more, and we can perhaps explore some of this stuff that you were doing for the Air Force and for that military personnel, because we know it's going to be at a higher level immediately, because obviously they're going to be in conflict zones potentially, as well as in other zones and peacekeeping missions and whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
This might be controversial. How shocked were you when you came across to the other side, to the corporate world, or were you not shocked with the differences? Because I speak to a lot of security companies, obviously come from ex-service military or ex-police and that kind of stuff. So there's a bar, but there's also a reluctance sometimes from the corporates to reach that bar, or a lack of knowledge. So what are your thoughts on that?
For me personally, it was a shock in the sense that I never really intended to be in the private sector to begin with. From a young kid, I always kind of knew the military was going to be my path. And so when I got in, I had all of my eggs in that basket. And so what resulted in me actually getting out of the service was I had the privilege, and some folks think the not so much the benefit of jumping out of planes when I had my job, and carried rucksacks, heavy backpacks all the time. So it was pretty tough on the body. There's a lot of people that really don't come out of this career field without their scars. And it just happened to get me a little bit sooner than what it does some other folks. It basically messed up my spine. And so when I came into the private sector, it was that transitional period. It really took me probably a solid 18 months to come within myself and reconcile that I'm no longer doing truly what I wanted to be doing. And so I was thrilled to learn that there was a career field and a career path that was similar to what I was doing in the Air Force, albeit, for a much different customer, for a much different use. And it's been drinking from a fire hose ever since, truly. I mean, there's still days I'll be working day to day and I'm trying to identify, like, okay, I guess this is what I'm doing today. And so there definitely was a transitional period, without a doubt. But it's been really cool to see exactly the different capabilities of what the private sector can actually do, and actually the relationship, at least for a lot of us in the US. I don't know the full extent of how this relates for other countries around the world, but there's actually a really strong relationship in many cases when you start talking about certain perils where private sector has an intersection with those capabilities in the government and making these kind of things work. Getting U.S. nationals back home and these sorts of things. And so the really cool thing is I have all of that expertise of what this looks like from the government side. So when I'm talking to my private sector clients, I can really leverage that and say, here's where all of this comes together. And that's really cool. A perfect example of this is when we had the Ukraine conflict develop and begin. A lot of folks over there were just, traveling for business, scholastic purposes, and of course the government reasons as well. Well, when we have something that extreme, there can be a real need for sometimes the government to step in and actually provide some level of resources and support, whether through the United States State Department or in some rare cases for certain individuals, the U.S. military will step in. You've probably seen the headlines of doctors getting saved and stuff like this all around the world, or journalists or whoever it might be. And so really being able to see, I know the background of how this can actually happen, what that looks like, and being able to provide guidance and support and answers to something that can seem to some kind of abstract of how does that actually happen? And so short answer long, I guess, it was really nice to be able to relate all of those experiences to what I'm now doing in the private sector. But there was no doubt a transitional period going through all of that.
I bet there was. And it's really interesting to hear that. And I think it's quite reassuring to hear that there is this kind of convergence that can kind of come together. And I think the insight that you bring, certainly for the companies that you're working with, and lucky them, is this idea that you do understand. Because I think the problem we've got at the corporate level at the moment, certainly for those clients that are getting new to this and haven't completely, is it just feels like it's a whole set of policies. And we just kind of write things down. And as long as we've got all of that done, then we're kind of okay. But there isn't, is there? There's this whole operational piece. And I think, again, if we, I don't know, so take there's an evacuation, for example, we shout these words around and what's your policy on evacuations? But actually what it means to do that, and actually what's going to happen as far as from a, so whether you've experienced it yourself when you were in the military, or you understand how that works. And that, I think that's a massive insight, because that's the important bit. We talk a lot about training or rehearsals or putting your travelers into situations, because we're going to read it and we're going to forget it, right? We're just seeing information all of the time. Unless it's kind of trained in you in some way, you're not going to know how to react. Just because you've got it written on a policy, it's not going to mean anything. And I think that's some of the stuff I think that you bring to the table as well, which I think with lived experience, which you've got, makes a massive difference when you're talking to clients, and I'm sure they benefit. So let's dig into your why, Jake. I hear you, and I understand that this was all, your dream was always to go in that direction. To just tell us kind of where this drive still remains, because it isn't the easiest of worlds to be in. People will argue it's maybe a little easier post-COVID. I don't completely agree that it is, and the world is definitely, it feels like it's imploding a little at the moment. Like things seem to be getting worse rather than better. Yet there's still this kind of disinterest sort of from the corporate sector. There's a part interest, there's a part not interest. So what is it that drives you in this space?
I think the ability to, and it sounds cliche, but help people in the circumstances where they're potentially having some of the worst time in their life, and truly being able to have, whether it's a program in place, or I really love what you just said a moment ago in terms of it really comes down to, in many cases, the training. Training is very near and dear to my heart, because it has so much to do about the individual traveler. And that was one of the biggest perspectives I learned when I was in the military, is just by the design of how they have this program set up. In the military, we don't call it travel risk management, we call it personnel recovery. And so if you just think about that concept, it's all about recovering the individual. But who has one of the largest roles in that? It is that individual that is out there exposed to the elements, exposed to the environment. And so I really love the ability to be a part of a mission where I'm helping people find answers to something that might be one of the most significant stressors they might actually face in their lifetime. And so I don't know where that came from. It's really kind of strange. I knew growing up, that's kind of just the path I was on. My dad would tell me, he was like, I don't remember this, but he would share with me throughout the last several years now doing what I do. And he said, I can remember you as a young kid saying, Dad, when I grow up, I'm going to rescue people. And just so bizarre, like that I actually followed that kind of a career path. And, it followed through from the youngest of ages. And so I guess to some degree, I have to give it to it's intrinsic within me. But, there's also the real joy I get from being able to be in a position where I can really provide answers to somebody that, has no answers or has no ability to provide them for themselves.
I just love that. I think I literally just went, love you, when you said that. That's so cute. And as most people are like, and that could be a doctor, couldn't it? Or it could be a fireman or whatever. There could be lots of different avenues that you could have gone down, but actually this is quite specific. And I just love what you're saying about, being able to help people in that moment when they literally need it the most. And ultimately it could be a life-changing moment, right, of some description or another. Possibly a life-saving moment, could be literally between life and death. Let's dig into this a bit more, Jake. Let's look at, what is an average day like for you, and what's the sort of stuff that you're doing, and how are you supporting companies? Because I think it's really important for our listeners to hear this side, especially the corporates, just to know all the other stuff that's going on in the background.
Yeah. And, really what I've done has had its definite evolution in how it's changed since the pandemic. So with the company I'm with now, it's Center for Personal Protection and Safety, which we always say, just go with the acronym CPPS because it'll save you about 150 syllables. But we have two areas of expertise that we're primarily known for. And one of those is travel risk management. The other side of it is what we call here in the States workplace violence prevention and intervention programs, workplace safety programs, workplace harassment programs, all of these different things, depending on where you find yourself in the world. And traditionally, those two things, and for many organizations, they still are stovepiped and never the twain shall meet kind of thing. However, there's been a real progression in the space. And actually, I think Bruce McIndoe, you said he was on one of your episodes recently, and he says it really well, but it's really getting into an age of what he calls people risk management. When I'm talking to clients, effectively it gets into the safety and security of individuals, regardless of where they find themselves working, right?
Yes.
And that's really been kind of the future and where we're starting to work with different organizations. And so working with an organization to build that program and that infrastructure, getting into the policies and the plans and the procedures, and then it is those various levels of training. So if we have these dusty documents on the shelf, well, actually bringing them to life and ensuring that we're implementing them. And that comes by training whoever is going to be working within this program. So training the traveler, training those that are managing this program, travel managers and those in benefits and those on the security side. Are they communicating with each other? Crisis management teams and exercising them, working with company executives or the leadership of a college institution, for those sending students around the globe, whoever it is, to be able to identify how do we actually make this program work. And in the age of, somebody, as long as they have a laptop, they can kind of work wherever they are in the world, so long as the organization allows it. There's a real different paradigm that we need to be looking at with that, because while they might be traveling, well, now they're kind of stationed in another location that we don't generally operate in. And how are we keeping track of this individual and certainly keeping track of them from that safety and security perspective? And so what I do in my day job now is help organizations really try and unpack that complex kind of puzzle and make it look like it's actually kind of an organized sheet of music, and be able to have the program within the organization, but also individuals that really know how to use it and make it effective for their business or their school, whatever it might be.
And for when it counts and for when it doesn't count, right? Because it's just music to my ears. This is, it's kind of what I'm doing, but in a slightly different area. But it's just actually trying to get some management into these travel programs, right? Bringing ownership back to the company, that this is your program, this is what you do, this is why you do it, this is who's doing it, and actually this is the stuff that's going to affect them, what they're doing, and everything else around it. And how are you going to protect this? And I talk about this a lot with people. I think COVID was a real change for that, because, and I say this too, and I don't want to tempt fate, but I think the point is we're living in a world now where stuff is happening. It happens regularly, be it a natural disaster, be it an act of terrorism, be it anything from those sort of high factor but sort of low probability type things, right through to we're dealing with people with suicide is the highest killer in men under a certain age now. We're dealing with major mental health issues. We're dealing with physical health issues. People need support in a different type of way on all trips. And actually, there's this idea that are we going back to what we were doing before COVID, where we're just traveling too much and we're not remembering the impact that it's having on people. But COVID kind of stopped it in its tracks, and I think it becomes the decider, because actually now companies know, look, things will really happen and it will really affect your business. So what is your business continuity plan? How are you going to keep things moving? And I think that's been the major change, certainly, that I've seen. I'm not sure that I've seen a reduction in travel or people really taking their travel risk management programs as seriously as they perhaps will be in the next 2 to 3 years. And I hope that it doesn't take a massive event to make that happen, but I have a feeling it might, because with the birth of, this standard, it's kind of like you're going to get caught with your pants down now. You don't really have an excuse not to do this stuff anymore. And I think people are making decisions as to what sort of companies they work for based on some of this stuff as well. Do you see any of that in the work that you do, that people are actually interested in this? Does it make a difference?
Well, if you look at these things societally, even, right? These different issues are a source of stress for people. Kind of going back to what I was sharing a few minutes ago, your everyday citizen is walking around now and has these kind of what we know as just typical day-to-day safety and security challenges. Now it's a source of stress for people. They really don't know what to do about them. They're looking for answers. And in some cases, it's a nice thing, because I'm seeing some organizational leadership come down from the top and say, what are we doing about these issues? And one of the big things I've worked with organizations with is, the issue of active assailant, active shooter, active aggressor, those sorts of things. Like you were saying, it's a very high impact event, but I'm glad to say we can still say it's a pretty low probability in many places of society. But it's become such a stressor for people, because where are they seeing it all the time? In the news, right? And so we're getting this image that this is something happening all the time, and it is happening more frequent than ever. It's becoming more dangerous in terms of the impact it's having on our collective, our bodies, our mental mindset, all of these different things. And so people are looking for answers. And I think we're at a day and age where, when organizations make the decision to start bringing these kinds of solutions and building programs around this, the very least is they're going to be now providing what I think is largely an organizational benefit, because these are no longer in the confines of an organizational context anymore. We need to really treat this as, this is a societal skill. This is a day-to-day skill, whether it's just generally being prepared, generally being aware of your surroundings, generally understanding that there are things that can happen to you. Maybe it is just losing your luggage, or maybe it actually is something a little bit more like you get the coronavirus while you're traveling around the world, and you have to figure out how to get yourself home. And so people are starting to ask the question, I think, in mass, more so than ever. And I think if organizations can really just identify that this is a question that's out there, we can provide the answer. And based on that, I think it's going to be a stress reliever, because people are having this answer now. They have some sort of framework that they can bring this within to. And based on that, well, the benefit to the organization is, because that stress is at least not the same level as what it may have been, now we're getting that productivity back, and we're lessening that concern, and we're getting that ability to concentrate on the things that we need and should be concentrating on. So short answer long, yeah, I think the next couple of years, you said it really well, Bex. I think the next couple of years, there's going to be a real transitional time frame where these things come more and more mainstream.
And almost, there'll be that, I guess, like with a lot of these things, it would be led by the larger corporates going down the chain to their smaller suppliers, demanding that these things happen. You're already beginning, as in the same way you see the cybersecurity stuff coming through, and you see operational stuff coming through. It's very common already to say, have you got a business continuity process or policy, and you'll start to see this stuff come through. And I think already, in fact, I think you and I might have even shared something on LinkedIn about this. You're seeing it in job roles as well. There's this real interest for me that's a change, right? That this travel risk management roles coming up. So not a travel manager, which is questionable. It was very limited as far as risk was concerned. It was much more about sort of contracts and that sort of stuff, really, and negotiating, and probably dealing with a lot of operational issues, to be fair. That's kind of where that sits. And now we're bringing into this kind of risk piece. So have you seen that from your corporates as well? This kind of understanding that it's great to come in to have someone like you come in and consult, but ultimately they need to look after this themselves too. So how are they going to restructure to sort of look at that? I look at sort of committees and putting the right people in. Is that something that you're experiencing as well?
Yeah, and we've actually been busier because of that. It's kind of with the center, it's actually kind of our business model in terms of equipping organizations to be able to handle this kind of an issue internally. And so we have a lot of these different capabilities and support mechanisms out there. Your travel assistance providers, insurance, open source intelligence capabilities, communications platforms, all of these different things. Well, that is an outsourced service. So really working with clients, where our space within this is we'll come and work with clients to really say, okay, these are all great, but how do you use them so it walks, talks, and sounds like your organization and fits your culture, and then giving them some tools to be able to use it internally. And you're exactly right. It does largely come with, let's put a multidisciplinary team together that represents the different functions within the organization. Just like we talk about in the standard, the TRM committee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's put that together, have this multifaceted group of folks that are looking at the different components of the organization, and now it's represented, bringing that communication together, because there's so oftentimes the case that these different capabilities within the organization are siloed. Travel managers are off on their island, security's off on their island, and yeah, they might kind of work together sometimes, but formalizing that relationship, right? And really bringing that together, and then going all the way down to the lowest levels of what does the traveler truly need to do? We can have the best assistance platform in the world. We can have the best insurance policy. We can have the best, whatever it is, put, insert X here on the line. But if the traveler really doesn't recognize exactly how to use these different capabilities and exactly how to engage them, what number to call, what button to push, how to maintain their own safety and security from the moment they have an issue occur to the moment that they do get this assistance, where do they need to go? How do they need to posture themselves? All of these different things. Well, if we don't engage the traveler at that level, there's a huge, huge gap. And that's where, as we were talking about earlier, that training piece is near and dear to my heart, because again, that traveler is so impactful within this. And in the essence that it's an informational process. If the support mechanisms aren't getting the information that something has gone wrong, we've got a real problem of being able to support those that we're sending around the world. And so being able to set these programs up in a manner where the organization has the capabilities in-house to bring these initiatives forward, and then using these support mechanisms to help them do what they do better is truly what it's all about. So yes, I have absolutely been seeing that pretty regularly.
Good. I'm really glad to hear that. It just feels like it's something. It's kind of validation, from my perspective as well. Because sometimes when you're a consultant, you do feel like on your own. But my mission is always, you've got this stuff, but what you've done is you've kind of solution solved, and that's not necessarily your fault. It's how the suppliers were sold to you, right? They've come in, duty of care solutions selling, la 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 la. We know the problems, but now we've got the problems. All of these suppliers kind of are looking at you, Mr. Customer, to know, or Mrs. Customer, to know what you do and who you are and all that stuff. And that's the bit that's missing, I think, because for 30 years they outsourced the program and they don't know what the program is. They don't have the right data. They don't understand it, or it's so compartmentalized, and actually it just becomes this little T&E line on a spreadsheet at the end of the month, and it's just it's a bind. It's a cost to control, as opposed to the reality of what it is of these people that have experienced stuff. Mm-hmm. Look, I told you we get round really quickly. This happens. So I'm going to just take you on to our final question, which is, and I think you've already given us loads of tips and loads of stuff. But if someone's wanting to get into this space, what is your golden nugget for them as to how they might start doing that?
If somebody wants to get into this space, honestly, I wouldn't say it's the most easy thing that can be done, because how we were talking about, this is a pretty niche thing. It's, having not been a part of it on the military side, I don't know that I would have ever found this coming into the private sector. So it really is kind of an interesting question. I would say that, start looking at the travel industry categorically. If we look at it from that perspective, because then you have the airlines, you've got travel management, travel agencies, companies out there. In the scholastic world, you've got study abroad. And so I'd say look at it high level and then drill in based on your area of skill, or your passion, whatever is of interest to you, and start, looking into those spaces. Of course, the Google machine is always beneficial in that regard, using some keywords to help find what might be out there. But beyond that, using the various tools available, if you have somebody on LinkedIn, or if you know somebody that is kind of in this world, whether it's from the security perspective or maybe from more traditional travel management, have conversations, reach out. And it can be kind of nerve-wracking for folks sometimes to start a conversation like that, but ask those questions and get that information. And sometimes just by having a conversation, people be like, you know what, I actually know somebody that knows somebody, and I'll make an introduction, and the path starts from there. But it does take effort. There's no shortage of effort on the individual to gather that information, see exactly what's out there, get a lay of the land, and then based on that, start with what you know and start with who you know. And usually that'll lead you down some path anyway.
It certainly leads you somewhere, doesn't it? I don't think any of us necessarily. I mean, you did know the kind of career you wanted to have, but you didn't think you'd be where you are now, which is interesting. And I certainly had no idea I would be where I am now with this stuff. Although it's just been a deep passion all the way through. I just really like this, and I think going in from the travel side is a really, really good, because the travel side is much more open, and it's a lot easier to get into. A lot of the risk side is security companies. It's ex-military, it's ex-police, so it can feel a little bit more close-knit, and you feel like you need to have some sort of real good experience to be able to actually sort of do that piece. Whereas the travel piece at the moment is kind of, it's all a bit new to us, to be honest with you. So actually just trying to understand that industry and how it works, and then look at the risks. I know for sure, when I first got into this and I started working at a hotel bed bank, and people were telling me, so how are the hotels vetted? And I'm there going, I knew that I could see gaps straight away, and then I've been able to sort of develop the career that I have within this. So I think that's really, really just all really good stuff. Jay, I can't believe we've come to half an hour already. I could do another half an hour just off the
Goes by fast.
I know, right? There's so much more I want to get into, and maybe we'll do it in our next series of episodes next year, and I'll bring you back for a second one, and we can get into it a little bit more. But
good.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute
thank you, Bex.
pleasure to have you. So to everybody, thank you for listening. You've been listening to Talking TRM with Travel Risk Bex. My guest today, Jake Newton. Please do listen to us. We'll have another episode, another couple of weeks. You can subscribe on all the normal channels, and you've got information about my guests and us at the end of all of this. Thank you so much. In the meantime, take care, look after your people, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.